Brooklyn, 1929. Lucky Luciano was a dead man walking. Joe, the boss, Masseria controlled Manhattan. He had 200 hardened soldiers. He had judges, cops, politicians in his pocket. And he'd decided that this 32-year-old upstart from the Lower East Side, this kid who talked about organizing crime like a business, was getting too big for his britches. So Masseria did what bosses do. He bought Lucky's most trusted man, Vince Terranova, Lucky's bodyguard. The guy who'd taken 2 bullets for Lucky in the Castellammare's war. The guy who'd been at Lucky's side through every deal, every meeting, every close call. Masseria offered Vince 100,000, more money than Vince would make in 10 lifetimes. All he had to do was put 1 bullet in the back of Lucky's head. October 23, 1929, Scarpado's restaurant. Lucky walked in for what Vince thought would be his last meeting. Back room. 8 men. Cigars, wine, laughter. Vince positioned himself behind Lucky, hand on his gun, waiting for the moment. Lucky turned his back, started talking numbers with Meyer Lansky. This was it. Vince drew, aimed at the base of Lucky's skull. Point-blank range. Impossible to miss. He pulled the trigger, click, and in that moment, that single, silent click, everything changed. The world Lucky was trying to change. To understand what happened in that smoke-filled back room at Scarpado's, you need to understand the world Lucky Luciano was trying to change. New York in 1929 wasn't just running on bootleg whiskey and gambling rackets. It was drowning in blood. The Castellammare's war had turned the streets into a battlefield. Old world bosses, men like Joe Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano, were fighting over territory like medieval warlords. And young soldiers were dying for disputes that started in Sicily before they were even born. Lucky saw the waste, the stupidity. These bosses were so busy killing each other that they were missing the real opportunity. Prohibition had made America thirsty, and whoever controlled the flow of alcohol controlled the city. But you couldn't control it if you were at war with half the families in New York. Lucky had a vision, a commission. 5 families working together, splitting territories, settling disputes through votes instead of bullets. Democracy for gangsters. It was revolutionary, it was smart, and it terrified the old guard. The king of the old guard, Joe, the boss, Masseria, was the king of the old guard. Born in Sicily, barely spoke English, ran his operation like a feudal lord. To him, Lucky was dangerous. Not because Lucky was violent. Plenty of guys were violent. But because Lucky had ideas. And ideas, Masseria understood, were more dangerous than guns. By October 1929, Masseria had tried everything to control Lucky. He'd offered him a bigger cut. Lucky refused. He'd threatened him. Lucky didn't flinch. He'd sent soldiers to rough him up. They came back with broken bones and a new respect for the kid from the Lower East Side. So Masseria made a decision. If he couldn't control Lucky Luciano, he'd kill him. But it had to be done right. No public hit. No war with Lucky's crew. It had to look like an accident. Or better yet, like betrayal from within. That's when someone mentioned Vince Terranova. The approach, September 30th, 1929, 3 weeks before the shooting. Vince Terranova was leaving his apartment in Little Italy when a black Packard pulled up. The window rolled down. Anthony, Tony Bender, Strollo sat in the back seat, smoking a cigar that cost more than Vince made in a week. Vince, get in. Vince's hand moved toward his waistband where he kept his .45. Who's asking? A friend. Someone who wants to make you rich. Vince should have walked away right then. Should have told Lucky about the approach. Should have remembered that loyalty was the only currency that mattered in their world. But he got in the car. Tony didn't waste time. You're a smart guy, Vince. You know how this works. You're loyal to Lucky. That's admirable. But loyalty doesn't pay for your mother's medical bills, does it? Vince's jaw tightened. His mother had tuberculosis. The treatments were expensive. The hospital bills were drowning him. He'd asked Lucky for help, and Lucky had given him 100,000. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. Tony opened a briefcase. Inside were neat stacks of 100 bills, $100,000. That's what Mr. Masseria is offering. Enough to pay every medical bill. Enough to move your family back to Sicily. Enough to live like a king for the rest of your life. For what? Vince asked, though he already knew. One bullet. One moment. You walk into Scarpado's on October 23rd. Lucky will be there, like he always is, for the Thursday meetings. You wait until he's distracted. One shot to the back of the head. Quick, clean. Then you walk out, get in the car we'll have waiting, and by morning you're on a boat to Naples. Vince stared at the money. The 100,000. His mother's life. His family's future. All for one trigger pull. And if I say no, Tony's smile faded. Then your mother dies slowly in that charity ward. Then you keep working for Lucky, watching your back every day, knowing that eventually someone else will take this deal. Because there's always someone willing to betray Vince. The only question is whether you're smart enough to profit from it. Vince got out of the car without saying a word, but the briefcase stayed with him. Tony had left it on the seat, the money visible, tempting. That night, Vince couldn't sleep. He kept seeing his mother's face, her labored breathing, the way she tried to smile through the pain despite having nothing. He kept seeing that briefcase full of money, enough to save her, enough to give his family a real life. 3 days later, Vince made his decision. He called the number Tony had left him. "I'm in," Vince said. "But I want half the money up front, Doan," Tony replied. Welcome to the winning side. What Vince didn't know, what Tony didn't know, was that Lucky Luciano already knew about the approach. Lucky Luciano didn't become a boss by trusting people. He became a boss by knowing people, by understanding that every man has a price, every man has a weakness, and loyalty is only as strong as the pressure applied against it. Lucky had eyes everywhere. Shoe shine boys, cab drivers, waiters, doormen. People nobody noticed. People the old guard never thought to pay attention to. And one of those people, a parking attendant named Sal Sabatino, had seen Tony Bender's Packard pull up outside Vince's apartment. He'd seen Vince get in. He'd written down the license plate. 2 hours later, Sal was sitting across from Lucky at a coffee shop in Greenwich Village. "Tony Bender's car," Sal said, sliding the piece of paper across the table. "Parked outside Vince's place this morning. Vince got in, stayed about 5 minutes, got out." Lucky looked at the paper, then at Sal. "You sure it was Bender?" "Positive. I've seen him before. Collects for Masseria's Brooklyn operation." Lucky was silent for a long moment. Then he pulled out 5 100 bills and handed them to Sal. "You didn't see anything. You weren't there, understand?" "Yes, sir, Mr. Luciano." After Sal left, Lucky sat alone in that coffee shop for 3 hours thinking. Vince had been with him for 4 years. Good years. Loyal years. They'd fought wars together. Lucky had trusted him with his life. Literally. Vince had taken 2 bullets meant for Lucky in the Bronx back in 27. But now Masseria was in Vince's ear. And if there was one thing Lucky knew about desperate men, it was that they made bad choices. Lucky could have killed Vince right then. One phone call, and Vince would disappear into the harbor. That's what most bosses would have done. Eliminate the threat, move on. But Lucky Luciano wasn't most bosses. He had a different plan. A better plan. A plan that would send a message not just to Vince, Not just to Masseria, but to every family in New York. The engineering Lucky called in Meyer Lansky. If Lucky was the visionary, Meyer was the engineer, the guy who turned ideas into reality. "I need you to do something for me," Lucky said. "I need you to make a gun that doesn't work." Meyer raised an eyebrow. "You want a broken gun?" "No. I want a gun that looks perfect, feels perfect, but when you pull the trigger, nothing happens. No bullet, no firing pin strike, just a click. You want a dummy gun, a very convincing dummy gun. Can you do it?" Meyer could. Within 2 days, he delivered a modified, the .38 Special that looked identical to Vince's service weapon. Same weight, same balance, but completely inoperable. The next part required precision. Lucky needed to swap Vince's real gun with the dummy without Vince noticing. That meant getting into Vince's apartment when Vince wasn't there. On October 20th, 3 days before the hit, Lucky sent Vince on an errand to Queens. "I need you to pick up a package from a contact in Astoria. It's important. Don't come back without it." The errand would take Vince at least 4 hours. Plenty of time. While Vince was gone, Lucky and Bugsy Siegel entered Vince's apartment. They found Vince's gun in a drawer next to his bed, exactly where Lucky knew it would be. They swapped it with Meyer's dummy. Vince would never know the difference. Not until it was too late. The waiting game now, Lucky had to wait. He had to let Vince make his move. Because if Lucky confronted Vince before the assassination attempt, Vince could deny everything. Masseria could find another traitor, and the cycle would continue. No, Lucky needed Vince to pull that trigger. He needed Vince to commit. And then, in that moment of ultimate betrayal, Lucky would reveal the truth. Not just to Vince, but to everyone watching. The message would be clear. You can't kill Lucky Luciano because Lucky Luciano is always 3 moves ahead. The night October 23, 1929, 11:30 p.m. Scarpado's restaurant, Coney Island. The back room was thick with cigar smoke and tension. 8 men sat around a table covered with ledgers, cash, and bottles of Canadian whiskey. This was Lucky's inner circle. Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, Frank Costello, Joe Adonis, 4 others whose names mattered less than their loyalty. They were discussing the future. How to end the Castellamarese War. How to convince the families that cooperation was more profitable than conflict. Lucky was at the head of the table, his back to the door. A position most bosses would never take. Too vulnerable. But Lucky wasn't most bosses. At 11:42 p.m., Vince Terranova arrived. He'd been drinking. Not enough to be drunk, but enough to steady his nerves. In his jacket pocket was the .38 Special, the gun he'd been carrying for 4 years. The gun he thought would make him the 100,000 richer. Vince positioned himself behind Lucky near the wall. Close enough to act, far enough not to seem threatening. He watched. Waited. Lucky had his back turned, gesturing with his hands as he explained something to Meyer about profit margins and territory splits. Vulnerable. Trusting. At 11:47 p.m., Vince made his move. He reached into his jacket, wrapped his fingers around the pistol grip, drew the weapon slowly, carefully. Meyer saw it first. His eyes went wide. But before he could say anything, Vince had already aimed the gun at the back of Lucky's head and pulled the trigger. The click-click. The sound of a firing pin hitting nothing echoed in that suddenly silent room. The conversation died. The laughter stopped. 8 men turned to look at Vince Terranova, standing there with a useless gun in his shaking hand. And Lucky Luciano, sitting calmly, not even flinching, took a slow sip of his whiskey. Then he set the glass down gently and turned around in his chair. He looked at Vince. Just looked at him. And in that look was something more terrifying than anger. It was disappointment. "I've been counting on you," Lucky said quietly. Those 5 words hit Vince harder than any bullet. Because in that moment, Vince understood. Lucky had known. He'd known everything. The approach from Tony Bender, the 100 Zellozernd, the plan, all of it. And instead of killing Vince, instead of disappearing him into the river, Lucky had let him walk into this room and pull that trigger. Let him reveal himself to 8 witnesses. Let him destroy his own honor in front of the people who mattered most. Vince's gun clattered to the floor. His legs gave out. He sank to his knees. "I'm sorry. God, Lucky, I'm sorry." "My mother." "I know about your mother," Lucky said, his voice still quiet but carrying through the silent room. "I've known for 6 months. You think I don't take care of my people?" Lucky reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He dropped it on the table. "Your mother's medical bills. All of them. Paid in full this morning. There's also a check in there for 10,000 for your family, for whatever you need." Vince's eyes filled with tears. But why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed to know. I needed to know if you'd choose money over loyalty. If you'd choose Masseria's, the 100,000 over our brotherhood." He paused. "Now I know." The judgment. Lucky stood up. He wasn't a tall man, 5'8". But in that moment he seemed 10 feet tall. "You're going to leave New York tonight. You're going to take your family and disappear. I don't care where. Sicily, California, Chicago. But if I ever see your face again, if I ever hear your name again, there won't be a second chance. Do you understand?" Vince nodded, tears streaming down his face. "And Vince," Lucky's voice dropped even lower, "if I ever find out you talked about this night, about what happened here, about the people in this room, your mother won't be the only one who needs medical attention. Are we clear?"
"Yes."
"Get out." Vince Terranova stumbled out of that back room, out of Scarpado's restaurant, out of New York, and out of organized crime forever. He'd come in thinking he was about to become a 100,000 richer. He left with nothing but shame and the knowledge that he'd been outplayed by the smartest man in the underworld. The ripple effect, word of that night spread through New York's underworld like wildfire. By morning, every soldier, every capo, every boss from the Bronx to Brooklyn knew the story. Lucky Luciano had known about a hit for 3 weeks. He'd let it play out. He'd made a traitor reveal himself in front of witnesses. And he'd done it all without spilling a drop of blood. Joe Masseria called an emergency meeting the next day. Tony Bender was there, pale and sweating. How did he know? Masseria demanded. Tony had no answer. Nobody did. That was the point. 2 weeks later, Masseria sent an emissary to Lucky. Not a threat, an offer. Peace, cooperation, respect. Lucky accepted, but on his terms. 6 months after that, on April 15, 1931, Joe Masseria would be shot and killed at Nuova Villa Tamaro restaurant in Coney Island. Lucky wasn't there when it happened. He was in the bathroom washing his hands. The perfect alibi. The Castellamarese War ended that day. And the commission, Lucky's vision of organized crime run like a corporation, was born. The legend, the story of Vince Terranova's betrayal, became legend. People told it for decades, passed it down to their kids, their grandkids. It became more than just a story. It became a lesson about loyalty, about staying 3 steps ahead, about what real power looks like. Because here's what Lucky proved that night at Scarpado's. The most dangerous weapon isn't a gun. It's knowing what's coming before your enemy does. It's turning their plan into your victory. It's playing chess while they're still learning checkers. Vince took 50,000 from Masseria. He left New York with nothing but shame. And Lucky, he went back to building an empire. The difference. That's the difference between a soldier and a boss. Between a guy who reacts and a guy who controls the game. Lucky Luciano didn't just survive an assassination attempt. He orchestrated it, controlled it, used it to send a message that echoed through every family in America. You don't mess with Lucky Luciano. Not because he'll kill you, but because he'll make you kill yourself. Years later, when Lucky was in prison, when he was deported to Italy, when his legend had grown even larger, a reporter asked him about that night. "Is it true your own bodyguard tried to kill you?" Lucky smiled. That same calm, dangerous smile he'd worn in Scarpado's back room. "Yeah. How did you know?" "I make it my business to know things. In this game, information is more valuable than bullets." "Were you scared when he pulled the trigger?" Lucky thought about it. "Nah. I knew that gun wasn't gonna fire. But I'll tell you what did scare me." "What?" "The fact that he pulled the trigger at all. That meant I'd misjudged him. That meant loyalty, real loyalty, was rarer than I thought." He took a drag from his cigarette. "But that's the business we're in. You trust people until they give you a reason not to. And when they give you that reason, you make sure everyone else learns from their mistake." The lesson, October 23, 1929, Scarpado's restaurant, back room. 8 witnesses. One click that changed everything. The sound of a firing pin hitting nothing. The sound of a plan perfectly executed. The sound that announced to the underworld that Lucky Luciano wasn't just another gangster. He was a mastermind. The click that saved his life. The click that ended Vince Terranova's career. The click that built the foundation for the most powerful crime organization in American history. Because sometimes the most important sound isn't a bang. Sometimes it's the absence of one. And in that silence, in that moment when death was supposed to come, but didn't, Lucky Luciano proved something that would define his entire reign. Real power isn't about pulling the trigger. It's about controlling who gets to pull it, when they pull it, and what happens when they do. The bodyguard pulled the trigger, the gun went click, and everything changed. That's the sound of genius.